A series of colossal missteps on the economy and public funding for political parties has landed Stephen Harper face to face with the historic possibility of being removed from office by a coalition of opposition parties. Of course, in the Canadian political climate, there are various opinions on the legitimacy of a coalition government. In fact, in September 2004, one opposition MP wrote a letter to then Governor General Adrian Clarkson, which said, "We respectfully point out that the opposition parties, who together constitute a majority in the House, have been in close consultation. We believe that should a request for dissolution arise, this should give you cause, as constitutional practice has determined, to consult the opposition leaders and consider all of your options before exercising your constitutional authority." Oh, I almost forgot the name of that pro-coalition MP. Stephen Harper.
John Baird, when the Prime Minister goes in and asks for his prorogation, what is the reason he's going to tell the Governor-General that the House should no longer meet?
I think it's time for cooler heads to prevail, almost a timeout. It really sells out everything the Liberal Party stands for and sells out everything the country stands for, to bring the separatists into a coalition.
This isn't football. We don't have timeouts. Well, it's the House of Commons, and the government has just met the House. Prorogation after 2 weeks without any legislation passed, without any legislation except one bill introduced. Prorogation when you've already had your throne speech accepted and then done nothing else, that is unheard of. So while prorogation is a part of the system, prorogation like this has never been a part of the system. If the government comes back and brings in the budget before there's a confidence vote, and if that budget passes with the NDP and the Liberals voting against it and the Bloc supporting, will that budget in some way be illegitimate because it was the Conservatives with Bloc support that passed the budget?
I think what we want to do is basically take a time out and go over the heads of the members of Parliament, go over the heads, frankly, of the Governor-General, go right to the Canadian people.
No, but John, you are a Conservative, and you've always been a Conservative, and you live in a British parliamentary system. And in a British parliamentary system, it is only legitimate for the government to be the government if it can sustain the support in the House of Commons. And to say now you're going to go over their heads, brush them aside, they're not even important anymore. We're going to go to the people, and the Governor-General isn't important. Now we're going to go, well, yes you did, you just said, we're going to go over their heads.
The Prime Minister, of course, is a former president of your organization, and you've been roundly trashing his budget all week long, from what I understand. Why?
Well, Graham, what you'd like to see is some leadership at the top in this process. You'd like to see them cutting their expenditures and showing some leadership that they can say, we're going to get our fiscal house in order before they're asking the country to take some tough decisions, and we see no sign of them doing that here.
Canada stands side by side with the State of Israel, our friend and ally in the democratic family of nations. We have stood with Israel even when it has not been popular to do so, and we will continue to stand with Israel just as we have said we would.
On January 18, 2006, just days before Stephen Harper was elected Prime Minister, he signed a pledge to support women's human rights. His exact words were, "I agree that Canada has more to do to meet its international obligations to women's equality. If elected, I will take concrete and immediate measures, as recommended by the United Nations, to ensure that Canada fully upholds its commitments to women." Despite his promises, Harper's Conservative government has put into place a number of measures that are rolling back women's rights across Canada.
Yesterday, the United States government announced a short-term financing package for troubled automakers. We recognize that an integrated industry requires an integrated approach, and we have been working closely with our U.S. counterparts in the development of our response. Today, the Premier and I are announcing the fulfillment of Canada's commitment to provide 20% of the U.S. support package, representing the Canadian portion of the industry, in the form of renewable loans payable to the Canadian subsidiaries of the Detroit-based auto manufacturers.
Do stiffer penalties deter attacks like this? The government says yes, and today introduced new crime legislation aimed at proving it.
We are sending a very clear message. We will not tolerate such violent criminal activity that attempts to flourish at the expense of law-abiding Canadians.
Opposition parties say they not only support the changes, they'd like the government to go further.
We need prevention, we need policing, and we need punitive action. And this bill alone doesn't go far enough.
The Prime Minister's visit and his new legislation are just part of a 1-2 punch. Tomorrow, Harper says his government will bring in tough new drug laws to go with the anti-gang legislation.
Mandatory minimum penalties for drug offenses.
End prohibition! Stop the gang violence!
Some people had a different idea about how to end the gang violence.
Stephen Harper has one goal and one goal only, and it has nothing to do with governing. How can he use this crisis to destroy the opposition? And wouldn't you know it, he almost did. Harper decided Canada doesn't need any kind of economic stimulus, so no, all we need to do is cancel the subsidies to political parties, a move that would have saved about $26 million, or about the same amount of money that Harper now spends every year on bodyguards when he travels to danger zones like Thunder Bay or Nunavut. But of course, the real upside for Harper in all this is this would have destroyed or crippled the opposition.